Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
Welcome, gentlemen, to another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. As always, I am your host, Scott McKay, at Scott McKay on just about every media platform out there, social media that is, with the exception of Instagram, where I'm Real Scott McKay. I guess that also applies to Threads now as well, if you're so inclined to use that, although I doubt many of you are. But YouTube, Skype, just about everywhere else, just put at Scott McKay and you'll find me relatively easily. The website is mountaintoppodcast.com, and the Facebook group, as always, is the Mountaintop Summit. Join us there. Speaking of joining us, today I have a new guest for you. I've already appeared on his podcast, which is called the Overcoming Adversity Podcast. Had a great time chit-chatting with my guest, Michael Allison, there. He is an international motivational speaker, author, coach, and business consultant. And he also asked me to add specifically, and I think this is pretty cool, that he is a father, a husband, and he also is a United States military veteran and recipient of the Purple Heart. So we thank him for his service. He is all about overcoming adversity. As a matter of fact, that's the name of his book that you can find on Amazon, and I'll give you those details a bit later. But the full name of his book is indeed Overcoming Adversity, Getting Your Life Back on Track. So without anything further, my guest, Michael Allison. Welcome, Michael.
Scott, thank you so much for having me here, man. It's truly a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, man, it's good to have you on the show. Listen, man, before we get started, you have several really cool ideas on your podcast that I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around, and I want you to tell us more about it. One of those is the idea of the 3D method. Tell us a little bit about that and how it applies to your work.
Most definitely. The 3D method is decision, direction, and destination. So some of the decisions that I was making in my life was leading me down the wrong path. So I had to start looking at making some of the right decisions in my life that would change the trajectory of where I was going. Same thing applied for the directions. So where was I doing? Well, some of the things that I needed to align myself with had to lead to the destination of where I was trying to get to. And then finally, the destination is, where do I want to be in my life? Where do I foresee myself in life? You know, what are some of my short-term goals? What are some of my long-term goals? What are the things that I would like to start manifesting into my life and have those things in abundance? And that's ultimately 3D method, putting it all together. And if you don't have all three of those together, all blended up together, then your life will spiral off and go into different directions. So that's the entire concept. Obviously, there's more layers to that, sub-layers to that, but ultimately that's the overarching part of the 3D method.
Well, then I guess it goes without saying that it would be helpful for these guys to find out a little bit more about what you've actually overcome, Michael. Tell us a little bit about your story, and let's see if I and or the guys out there can relate to any of this.
No doubt, man. So, my story started off as a kid born in Jamaica, and initially coming from very, very humble beginnings, we went through a flood. And from that flood, we went through Hurricane Gilbert. This was back in the 1980s. My grandparents are from England and from Cuba. And luckily, they were there to help us because from this hurricane and from this flood, it left us homeless. So my mom and dad lost every single thing that they earned and built. And throughout that temporary time of us being homeless, my grandparents built us a house where we was able to get back on our feet. But my family wanted to change the trajectory of our life because they saw what it was like back in Jamaica and very I would say not the best situations of living. So they decided to go to Brooklyn, New York to live and start getting things set up for themselves so they could eventually make a better life for us. So what they did was they started that process in New York. And then we stayed with my grandparents in Jamaica for a little bit. And then eventually they filed for us. So they got visas. And then they sent for us to come and live with our aunts in Miami, Florida. But when we got to Miami, Florida, it was not the nice South Beach, Miami, Florida. We came to Overtown. Unfortunately for me, when I got to Miami, what I saw was prostitutions, drug dealers, crack addicts. It was some of the first things that I seen. So I came from a kid seeing just the countryside of life to coming to Miami, Florida, and just being dropped right into the projects. On top of that, the first night that I was there, I was molested by a family member, and that's something I believe some kids should not ever experience, but that's something that I faced. As I got a little bit older, a kid like me was suffering with just being in isolation and a sense of belonging. So I asked my mom, could I join the Boy Scouts? And I did. And while I was in the Boy Scouts, we had a trip to coming up to go to Washington, D.C. So my parents said it was okay for me to go to D.C. So we saw the White House, we saw the Lincoln monuments, and so on and so forth. But the last night while I was there, all of the boys, it was 12 of us, we were split up in 2 hotel rooms. And when I was taking a shower and I got out, I seen 5 of the other boys on the wall naked. And when I got out of the shower, I was told to get on the wall too with the rest of the boys. I experienced something some kids should never experience either. So we got beat up, we got hazed, we got mistreated, and some inappropriate ways that some young boys at 11 years old should never be treated. As I got a little bit older, I struggled in school with getting bullied and hazed because of my language, because I was born in Jamaica, so I didn't speak American English very well at that particular time. So it calls for lots of bullying, picking on, fighting, all these different types of things as I struggled until I eventually started to speak English a lot better. Fast forward in high school, I played offensive line for my football team, and I was pretty good. I had hopes and dreams of playing in the NFL. I had an opportunity with a scholarship to go to University of Wisconsin. But unfortunately, my 11th grade year, I tore my MCL, 12th grade year, I tore my ACL. So those opportunities was taken away. And being a family that didn't have those types of resources to go to college, or I would say all of the different opportunities that some of my friends was getting, we were looking at different options. What stood out for me when I was around 17 years old was the United States Marine Corps. So I looked at what the Marine Corps stood for when it came to esprit de corps, the brotherhood, the leadership, and all of these different things that I think could make a man of me. And so I told my parents this was something that I wanted to do, and I joined the Marine Corps at 17 years old. As I fast forward with my career in the Marines, I went through boot camp, graduated that in 3 months, and then we went to Marine combat training, which is a training that's training you for 10 days. And you have to learn how to navigate, use different types of weapons, and pretty much simulating like if you was going to be in a war for 10 days. For me, though, I'm that kid from Jamaica where it's really hot. I'm the guy from Miami that's really hot. And I went to North Carolina, and it was single digits in January in 2000. From there, man, I on that last hike, it started snowing very, very hard. And halfway through that hike, it was a 10-mile hike, I found myself in the emergency room with frostbite and hypothermia. As I fast forward a little bit, man, in September 9/11, when the terrorists hit the Twin Towers, that really rocked me. I was driving in my car and the base got shut down. I seen people frantically going crazy. And then I got a phone call from a family member asking me, am I going to war? And I was like, what are you guys talking about? And then I went to go see the TV, and I just seen what took place. And after seeing that, I knew when I joined the military that it was always a possibility of going to war, but this really, really made it set in to know that there was a high possibility of actually going to war. And then shortly after that, President Bush declared that this is a terrorist act, and he did declare war. So me and my unit began training in California, and we trained simulating different war scenarios. And then Captain Venning, which is the person that wrote the foreword for the book, and he told us it was time to go. So we left from California to Seattle, from Seattle to Canada, from Canada to Germany, from Germany to Kuwait, and from Kuwait, we marched all the way into Iraq. While in Iraq, man, I seen some of the things that I never thought I could see. The first night we got there, we got incoming within 30 minutes, and we all had to get down and find cover. Shortly after that, I went on my first mission, and I was shot at. And literally, you could see the RPG go over my head and land behind my tank. I was an 1833 Amphibious Assault section leader. And right after that, me and my gunny, we orientated our machine guns, and we had to shoot every single thing that was in front of us, including the building and whoever was inside of that building. As we get ready to depart, was on our last mission while I was over there in Iraq, and I was delivering some supplies to my unit. Was delivering some ammunition, some food, and some water. And as I was delivering these supplies, I was talking to my doc, my gunny, my best friend, Salto, which was the driver, and we had a machine gunner that was sitting in the center of the Humvee. Gave them the supplies. I pulled off. As soon as I pulled off, I heard the loudest explosion I could ever hear in my life. This explosion went off no less than 10 seconds. It jarred me inside of my tank as I was halfway outside of my vehicle. I got shrapnel above my eye, injured my shoulder, injured my left hip, and injured my back, and knocked me down inside of the vehicle. Once we realized everything was safe and secure for us to get out and check on everybody else, all I seen was nothing but smoke and fire. And the same people that I was just talking to was gone. There was a hole in the ground that was the size of a pool. I saw my gunny with nothing but smoke over him. Our doctor lost half of his leg. The gunner lost half of his face. And my best friend, Salto, was dead. And we had to put him in a body bag. After that, man, my life changed. You know, I never obviously experienced war or anything like that until that moment. And your adrenaline is pumping at such a high level. And to deal with that loss really, really rocked me, especially with somebody that was close to me. You know, when I got out of the service, man, the transition was not the best. You know, I worked on a railroad, got laid off a couple times until I eventually got back on the railroad. I witnessed 2 suicides on the railroad that brought back a whole bunch of memories that really gave me some flashbacks. After that, I was going through a divorce at the same time. And I was not in a good space at that time. So the same night that I got the divorce letters, I got a DUI. I spent the night in jail, lost my license. After losing my license, I had to do 1 year of probation and to do community service. And then I lost my job. I eventually decided to get my life back together a little bit, you know, so I went back to school, got my bachelor's degree, got my master's degree, and just started volunteering, helping other veterans down in Miami, Florida. And eventually, once I got myself a little bit back together, I took a job in Washington, D.C., where I became a project manager and a government contractor. And I was doing that, but at that time, I was going through another custody battle with my first ex-wife for 3 years. And that mentally was taking a toll on me. And as this was taking a toll on me, I decided to get married again. And while I was going through this marriage, things was not going the greatest. And within 6 months, we filed for divorce. So filing for divorce, you know, I asked my supervisor, could you move me back closer to Miami, Florida, so I could be just closer to my son? But this was when I was at my worst, man. I started heavily drinking. I was on 13 different medications. And all of these things that I was balling in was inside of me. And I didn't think there was any point of living anymore. And I took myself to the bridge that's out there in Tampa, Florida, with my gun and one of the heaviest weights in my garage and tried to take my life. But it was in that moment, you know, I'm a man of faith. And that's when God spoke to me and told me that you have a purpose. You have a story to tell, even if it's just to make an impact on one person. But you have a son, you have a family, and you could change all of these things that's going on in your life. And that's exactly what I did. You know, I chose to go back to Rush University and get some help, learn all about neuro-linguistic programming, cognitive thinking, PTSD. Went to Emory Hospital, did some of the same things. And then after that, man, I just started employing all of these different positivities around me. So I got mentorships, I got coaching, I got accountability partners. And then once I started doing all of these things, I just seen that my life just started changing. And once I did change my life, you know, I decided to go back and change the situation with my ex-wife. And we went through counseling and we started working on our relationship. And I reconnected with her son because we were in a blended family. And we got that back together. Me and my first ex-wife became much more better on better terms as we started working through things in regards to how we communicate and how we raise our son. And ultimately, man, I got my entire family back. I started my own business. And life is much more better, man. So that's summary of my story. If that make any sense to you, man, I thank you for listening to that, man.
You know, I'll tell you, Michael, usually this show isn't about backstory, but in your case, I was very happy to let you riff on this because first of all, I think with, man, I hesitate to use this word, but I bet you'll appreciate the exact word I use. That wealth of information that you just expressed, every guy everywhere within the sound of our voices is going to relate to something in there. And, you know, while in my life, I can't really say I've dealt with the level of adversity or the amount of adversity that you have, I've certainly dealt with my share. And there's plenty there that I can relate to. And I know nowadays that it's that experience, that adversity, that helps me be the coach I am today and have the impact on other people's lives. If I were a guy who had lived a charmed life, I wouldn't be nearly as equipped to help other people. And I'm sure you feel the same way, right?
Absolutely, man. I think going through all of these different adversities has helped me bolster my knowledge in regards to how to deal with certain situations, whether it's for myself or for anybody that I'm coaching or consulting with.
Now, you certainly are a huge proponent of getting past the adversity, not being a victim, taking your life back. What do you tell guys to do to get rolling on that? Because, you know, the topic du jour was allegedly supposed to be ending stubborn patterns of failure. And indeed, a lot of guys, if they don't look this adversity in the eye, they're kind of doomed to repeat it, aren't they? I know you have this concept called breaking the bottle that I suspect has plenty to do with this.
Most definitely. What I found with myself and lots of other guys is we bottle in so many emotions. For myself, I was carrying so many things from my childhood all the way to what happened to me in the military, all the way into different relationships that I got into with my ex-wives, or just even like dating before I even met them. You know, so you could think about we bottle in emotions of pain, anxiety, lies, regrets, anger, worries, hatred, unforgiveness, failure, you know, abuse, all of these different things that we carry inside. We might bottle in our happiness, our excitement, because we're afraid to show some of those things. And we'll blame and all these different types of things we're bottling in. But it's until we break the bottle, which is what I call the concept, and then start making the decisions around ownership, accountability, responsibility, and then making an identity shift. You know, for me, I had to make an identity shift of who I am. So I had to change all of the things around my values, my integrity. You know, what are my priorities? What are my standards? What I stand for and what I don't stand for. And that's the concept for me when it came to like breaking the bottle.
You know, when we talk about guys and our emotions, society plays weird mental games with us, doesn't it?
Right. That's right.
Yeah, you can't be this toxic masculine guy who gets violent and takes out his aggressions on people. But by the same token, you're not really allowed to be happy, joyful, or have any fun either as a man. So I really appreciate what you're saying here. And here's something I've noticed relatively recently in my practice, kind of an epiphany that I've gotten, Michael, is that when you meet someone who's a little surly or maybe a little mean to people, doesn't really want to make friends, isn't easy to get along with, a lot of times it isn't that those folks are bad people. It's all offense they've built up. And I know that's not a new concept, but I think the deeper dimension of the meaning behind that is new, at least to me. Sometimes these people have just never been appreciated. They've never had anything gratifying happen to them. They haven't experienced any level of success. There's not a specific accomplishment or even a moment in time where they can stand up and say, you know what, I just won. They feel like life's gotten the best of them. They've gotten the short end of the stick. And it's amazing sometimes that the simple act of not responding in kind, but saying, hey, you know what, I'm willing to listen, or I'm willing to hold space and stand in the gap here. And, or even the simple gesture of appreciating them for something when on the surface they seem like the last person on earth you would like to appreciate for anything because they're just so darn hard to get along with. Sometimes you get a huge breakthrough, maybe even instantaneously from people. It's kind of like magic. Have you ever seen anything like that in your practice?
Yes, I have. You know, I've seen it where we carry that as a defense mechanism, and we try to armor ourselves and put this barrier, put this wall around us, kind of building up ourselves to be like Teflon or something like that, you know?
Right? Yeah.
So I often see that, but as once you get to speaking with people and being totally authentic with them and finding out who they are truly at their core, truly identify your true authentic self. Whenever we choose and decide to become much more vulnerable and become much more transparent with how we deal with things and handle things, it actually gives you much more better peace of mind. It gives you much clarity with how you operate and how you do things. It makes your decision-making a whole lot better. It makes the direction of where you're trying to take your life a whole lot better. And then now that veil is going down and you could actually see the destination of where you're trying to be. You could actually pinpoint where you're trying to be in life, where you're trying to go in life.
You know, that magic word vulnerability just came up again while you were talking, Michael. And that's so difficult for a lot of guys because they view it as weakness, whereas it's really a double-edged sword. Yeah, you might be a weak turtle crossing the highway that's subject to get run over, and that doesn't feel very manly or powerful to a lot of guys. But it's also about taking a risk, not knowing what the outcome might be. And a lot of times that shell that we build up around ourselves, kind of like the tortoise, makes us perhaps ironically more liable to get run over on the highway than it does enable or empower us to get to where we really want to be in our social life with other people, because we're just kind of holding up that shield as a defense mechanism, like you said. Isn't that something?
That is something. In actuality, though, if we was to look at it on the opposite side of it, actually shows a strength. You know, there's strength in actually identifying some of these things where you could actually work on it, right? So whenever you identify some of the things you might be consider a weakness, you could actually work on it to make it a strength and get better at it. You know, I also found that whenever I've been around guys, around a network of guys, and sharing some of these things, they're actually more inclined to support me and help me as I share some of my vulnerability and transparency, as they're going through some of the same things too. But we walk around with this armor around us, like we got to be tough, we got to be macho. When in all actuality, if we was to just open up and speak it just as brothers, just as friends, and communicate with each other, we actually could help each other more.
Yeah, we would realize we aren't alone. A lot of other men, dare I say, all other men are carrying a burden of their own that they feel either ashamed or worried somehow about, expressing. I think you're onto something there. So what about practical ways that we can end this stubborn pattern of failure? I mean, obviously building that shield, being ashamed, not even recognizing why we're failing all over and over again. Obviously, you know, all of that plays into it, but I would love to get your informed take on this and also give guys some solutions, some practical ideas.
Most definitely. Number one for me is identifying who I am at my core, you know, and start learning how to love myself first. You know, I can't love anybody else until I start loving myself and identifying myself. I can't pour into your cup until I start pouring into my cup first, you know. So for myself, I'm working on where am I at mentally? So what am I putting inside of my head? For myself, you know, I'm listening to my meditations, right? I'm also filling myself up with gratitude. I'm also doing the things that makes me feel better. So I'm going to the gym every single morning. I'm walking every single morning. I'm putting in 3 miles every single morning. After that, then I'm having that conversation with myself and what am I seeing for the day? What am I projecting for the day? Am I on par with what I'm trying to do? Then I could pour out into my family. Then I know I could pour out into my business. Then I know I could pour out into my friends. Those are some of the easiest things that I do in the morning times for myself. At nighttime, I want to have some of those alone time for myself. So I'm sitting down and I'm reading my book. And my book is to make sure that I'm stimulating my brain and stimulating my mind. That's going to keep me thinking and keep me in a positive flow. I think the energy that I put into my body is the energy that I'm going to pour out into somebody else. So I make sure that anything that I'm reading, it's actually a book that's going to be something that's going to be fulfilling and fruitful. So I know that I could actually take something from that and I could ponder on that throughout the day. So I'm reading every single day, at least 20 to 30 minutes every single day. So those are some of the practical things that I actually do and work on for myself at my core that are just simple things that I do. There's much more things as I go on with myself and throughout my business that I actually practice. But some of those things are on a much more weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and a quarterly basis too as well.
Well, the elegant simplicity in what you just said, Michael, is that you've replaced those bad patterns with new habits, with new rituals almost that get you into a new pattern that leads to successful outcomes rather than those negative outcomes. I love it.
Absolutely, man. It's reprogramming my mind. You know, I used to have like a fixed mindset and I had to change that to a growth mindset. Now I'm looking at challenges and I'm embracing opportunities. I'm looking at obstacles and I'm overcoming any setbacks that I have, right? I'm making much better efforts as I go out throughout the day and I'm looking much more optimistically at things. I used to find that I was always around different types of people and I noticed the energy that was around me. So I had to change my circle. And once I changed my circle, right? Now I could deal with conversations a whole lot better because you're in business. You're going to be communicating with people every single day, right? So what is the energy and what is the flow that's coming out of you is key for me and very important when I'm thinking about just having a optimistic growth type of mindset.
Yeah, and instead of having to fake it or paint on some pretty face, you get to actually be authentic as you go out and live, move, have your being, and do your business.
Absolutely, man.
That makes it so much easier. There's so much less you have to keep track of when you're being honest and authentic, right?
Most definitely. It's so much easier when you're being your true core authentic self. You don't have to pretend, you don't have to lie, you don't have to make anything up, and just let people accept you just for who you are. A lot of times whenever we decide to put on a facade or put on anything that you might see out here on social media or so on and so forth, then you got to keep on compounding on that, opposed to if you was to do what you're supposed to do, be honest, be authentic, you don't have to worry about those things. Your head would be so much clearer when you process things.
That's so true. And you know what? We can tie that back to our relationships with the women in our lives too. When we're true to ourselves and we portray who we actually want to be, we're much more likely to attract a woman we're going to get along with who's looking for those same values that she shares. And voila, what do you know? We get along with her and we can relate to her. You mentioned that you're a father and a husband, and you told the story earlier in this show, Michael, about how you had to fight for that. I saw this morning, even as we're recording this very morning, a meme on Facebook that read, "A long-term relationship is the ultimate status symbol." And I couldn't help but comment. I said, the irony of that statement is when you have a happy long-term relationship with the right woman, you don't need status symbols anymore. None of them make any sense. There's just no need for it. I mean, I was more concise when I wrote it down on Facebook for the world to see. But the deeper meaning behind that is cars, houses, material possessions. Hey, look at me, gaining the approval of other people just to feel better in the moment temporarily. It all pales in comparison to having the right woman by your side because you did the work, you're authentic, you ended the stubborn patterns of failure, and now you can move on to a new pattern of success with the right woman. I think there's a lot there, for sure.
For sure, man. You know, me and my wife was actually talking about this yesterday. So, Scott, I had the opportunity to speak to a group of people yesterday. And towards the end of me speaking, I was telling them that I had to work to get my family back. I had to work to get my wife back. You know, now with me and her back together, she's seeing the true authentic me. She's seeing the true honest me. She's seeing the true vulnerable me. And now that this woman is side by side with me in my business, and she already has her own company of what she's doing, but we're happier, we're smiling, we're doing things together just because we're much more better for each other this go around, as we had to put in that work and work on ourselves individually. It's been magical, man. It's been beautiful.
Yeah, and what do you know? The relationship, contrary to popular stereotype, doesn't feel like work anymore. You can actually enjoy this partnership. Fantastic, fantastic stuff. His name is Michael Allison. He's an international motivational speaker, author, coach, business consultant, Purple Heart veteran, and of course, a father and a husband. And when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Allison, Allison, you will be teleported magically to michaelwallison.com. And what will they find when they get to that site, Michael?
Yes, Scott. What they will find is my speaking page. If you wanted to book Michael Allison for a speaking gig, I do motivational speaking. I could speak on leadership too as well. I could speak on resilience. I could speak on veterans transitioning. I could speak on mental health awareness. And I have two keynote speeches. So the keynotes will be on breaking the bottle or just taking authority in your life. And I could tailor these speeches to a company or to any types of group that would need motivational speaking. Also on our website, you will find the consulting programs, and you can find some of the coaching programs for personal development, professional development, and some business consulting as well. Scott, thank you so much, brother, for having me on, man.
Yeah, man, good stuff. And once again, that's at mountaintoppodcast.com/Allison, Allison, or you can just go to michaelwallison.com. Also, I'm going to place Michael's book at the top of my Amazon influencer queue. As always, that's at mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon. The name of that book, of course, Overcoming Adversity, Getting Your Life Back on Track. And Mr. Michael W. Allison, of course, it's my pleasure to have you on this show. We hope you'll come back and talk about another interesting and salient topic for these guys real soon. Thank you again, man.
Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, right on. And gentlemen, please go to mountaintoppodcast.com. Get acquainted with the master classes. We have a new one every month. We got some great topics in the rearview mirror and several ahead of us. You can get in on the previous ones and do that with immediate gratification. You can have same-day access to the master classes we've done in the past. You can also check out the new ones coming up. While you're at mountaintoppodcast.com, please get on my schedule. Talk to me free for 25 minutes about whatever's on your mind in terms of, well, maybe breaking the mold in your own life. I once heard a joke from Emo Phillips, Michael. He says, when I was born, the doctor said they broke the mold, but since then, a lot of that mold has grown back. I was never a fan of that guy's stage presence, but boy, his jokes themselves are funny. He's a great comedy writer. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. Michael and I want to help keep the mold away and help you have a relatively, I don't know if I want to say sanitary life, but certainly a more mold-free life.
Absolutely.
And, it's an easy way to get started there is to contact either Michael or me. If you want to contact me, like I said, get on mountaintoppodcast.com. There's a button at the upper right-hand corner for 25 minutes. It's free to talk to me about whatever's going on. Let's get a plan together to get your life back on track. We want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Origin in Maine. That's Jocko Willing's company, of course, Hero Soap Company, and the Keyport. Use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 when you get anything from any of our wonderful sponsors, all of whom you can visit as well by going to mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.